Tonight's episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver was an absolute whirlwind. Think sharp, rapid, fire jokes, biting satire, and one of the most stinging breakdowns of a normal American institution you're likely to see on late-night TV. If you thought presidential libraries were just quiet buildings where old men go to relive the good old days, think again. John Oliver lifts the lid and exposes a world of self-glorification, questionable ethics, and loopholes ripe for exploitation, especially by the likes of Donald Trump. But before we get into the real meat of this episode, let me catch you up on how it starts, the hot-button events that set it off, and how it all leads to the wild ball-tastic conclusion. So the episode opens with Oliver diving headfirst into the chaos of the week, Eric Adams abruptly dropping out of the New York mayoral race, never a dull moment in Big Apple politics. Huge controversy over the NFL choosing one of today's most popular musical acts for the Super Bowl halftime show, and a big one. A government shutdown that sent shockwaves across America. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees went unpaid, essential programs ground to a halt, and the internet, led as always by Donald Trump, went on a meme spree that was, let's say, disturbingly tone-deaf. Trump's meme includes him playing cowbell while simultaneously doubling down on racist tropes, confusing aesthetics, and suggesting his policy advisor Russ Vought is the real boss of America now. All very ominous and, in typical Oliver fashion, hilariously shredded on screen. Within days of the shutdown, nearly 800 top military brass were yanked into an emergency meeting where the new Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, delivered a speech. The speech, honestly, sounds like something a frat bro would give if he suddenly found himself in charge of the entire armed forces. No more Beardos. Fat, shaming everyone from soldiers to generals, and launching some truly random diatribes about wokeness and rules of engagement. And just when you're recovering from that, Trump shuffles on stage and, low on energy and heavy on digression, starts critiquing the aesthetics of military ships. He even weirdly implies that stealth ships are ugly, and ugly things aren't stealthy, leaving the audience to wonder if he's wandered off his train of thought for good. But then comes the real chilling part. Trump's repeated hints at sending troops into Democrat-run cities, labeling it a war from within. Oliver doesn't sugarcoat the seriousness of that rhetoric. Sure, it might sound bizarre coming from a guy with the sleepy demeanor of a sunbathing cat, but the reality is darker, especially since the use of federal forces in places like LA, DC, Portland, and now Memphis has become shockingly routine. We get a glimpse of the administration's tough guy posturing with Stephen Miller, the architect of many contentious immigration policies, boasting about how federal agents are hardcore and ruthless. Oliver immediately hammers the absurdity of these chest-thumping statements, reminding us that if you're looking for a poster child for intimidation, Miller, with his infantile energy, is probably not it. This week also saw harrowing new footage from ICE raids, specifically in Chicago, where federal agents zip-tied kids, tossed tear gas near schools, and handcuffed a city council member. The details are gut wrenching 8 children crying, neighbors fearing for their safety, and agents displaying astonishing cruelty, including one caught on camera muttering, "F, them kids." Oliver points out how profoundly unacceptable it is suggesting the only person with even a remote excuse to utter that is the guy cleaning the Chuck E. Cheeseball pit, but certainly not federal agents in charge of detained children. Yet, amid this grim reality, Oliver finds a glimmer of hope in community resistance. Around the country, protests against ICE have been lively and creative, from a giant frog dancing outside a detention center to the legendary sign that reads, "I've ed 2 of you on Grindr, pretty sure," held up at a Chicago protest. In Rochester, when ICE tried to corner workers on a rooftop, the community rallied via social media. The crowd grew so powerful that agents left, leaving behind a border patrol truck with its tires slashed. The resounding chant, "Hey, hey, hey, goodbye," perfectly captured the defiant spirit, and Oliver makes it clear that this unwavering pushback is what's needed to expose the ugliness of the administration's tactics. Shifting gears, Oliver moves on to a story about the controversy surrounding Bad Bunny as the upcoming Super Bowl halftime performer in 2026. Bad Bunny, a giant in Latin music and outspoken critic of ICE, is ironically a symbol of American football's shifting identity. Conservative commentators are shown in meltdown mode, lamenting the choice of a Puerto Rican star for an American event, and embarrassing themselves with confusion about names, Bugs Bunny, instead of Bad Bunny, and nationality. One voice finally cuts through the noise to remind everyone that Puerto Ricans are, in fact, Americans, cueing applause from the studio. Then Oliver unveils his main story, a deep dive into presidential libraries, the #1 nice little activity, according to tongue-in-cheek, Retired Dad's Quarterly. What the public thinks of as august institutions safeguarding history are, in fact, complicated amalgams of archives and ego-driven museums. Were treated to highlights like Reagan's obvious horse obsession, animatronic displays, and Clinton's bug exhibit, which, despite claims, is not the natural habitat for giant ladybugs. Oliver jokes about the gifts that presidents receive, a Michael Jordan statue sent to Clinton, for example, and points out how many of these treasures end up in storage, for better or worse. He traces the history of presidential libraries from FDR's era, when presidential records were personal property and frequently destroyed, sometimes by rats, sometimes by fire, sometimes by relatives with garbage cans. FDR changed that by donating his documents for public study. Over time, legislation made it mandatory for presidents to hand over all records, and dedicated government-employed archivists catalog the madness of paperwork, gifts, and emails. But the kicker is that the museums themselves, the public-facing sides of these libraries, are privately funded, president-organized passion projects. Presidential foundations run the fundraising and design, allowing presidents' friends and family to curate exhibits. This regularly results in some wild editorial choices. Z.C. Reagan's library skips over Iran, Contra, Clinton's glosses past impeachment, Bush's obliquely references Iraq's WMD activities, and Nixon's initial setup painted Watergate as a media coup. Even the archives are subject to private influence, with ex-presidents having veto power over directors and the order in which documents are reviewed and released, sometimes delaying key records for a century. And then there's the issue of money. Building these libraries has become ridiculously expensive. Obama's is slated to cost $830 million. And there are virtually no rules on fundraising. Presidents can accept unlimited donations from anyone, including lobbyists, corporations, and foreign governments, while still in office. The Mark Rich pardon scandal, which Oliver gleefully revisits, underlines just how easy it is to funnel big dollars through these charitable library foundations. With Trump, as always, the risks and abuses skyrocket. Oliver points at enormous settlements from Paramount, Meta, and ABC, all earmarked for Trump's library, leftover inaugural committee funds, a jaw-dropping $400 million plane from Qatar funneled through a loophole, and the administration actively weakening the IRS's ability to police such deals. It feels less like honoring history and more like a backdoor for bribery and influence. Oliver's grand solution: more transparency, laws banning in-office fundraising, and stronger support for the National Archives. But, above all, a challenge to the core assumption: these libraries shouldn't be celebratory monuments, but honest archives, separating myth, making from true history. The episode closes with Oliver offering a life-size rendering of LBJ's balls to the highest presidential library bidder. A pinch-perfect final gag that nails his entire thesis about vanity, ego, and legacy. So that was this week's Last Week Tonight, where Oliver dismantled the myths behind presidential libraries, took aim at hypocritical power moves from the top, and reminded us why satire is crucial in times like these. If this breakdown got you thinking, laughing, or just a little more angry, I want to hear what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share with a friend, and hit subscribe for even deeper dives into the biggest stories of the week. See you next time.